We meet again.
Thank you, and thank God.
And you really look well this year. You really look great. Really. Very young.
That's what they always say when somebody is sick of heart, has diabetes, and you know what. But thanks anyway.
Yeah, but you're feeling great, right?
Yes.
Yeah. In the United States, the people who contact me are having a hard time trying to figure out where is the Catholic faith.
Right.
Does it reside in Rome? Does it reside with the Pope? Does it reside where? They must obey Vatican II. It was a council.
No.
What do you mean, no?
Well, I'll explain.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Vatican II, which is usually called by the two conciliar popes, that means John the 23rd and Paul VI, a pastoral council, now, ever since 1978, has been called the council. Something that first time happened when Paul VI said that the Second Vatican Council is one of the most important councils in church history, possibly even more important than Nicaea. Any historian will see the nonsense in that statement. However, there are several ways of proving that Vatican II is not exactly a council, for the simple reason that, first of all, you have to establish what is a council. And it is quite surprising to see that even some of the best Catholic theologians are mistaken on that point, probably because ever since in 1870, the papal infallibility was made a dogma. People make the mistake of extending this papal infallibility into, let's say, into matters where it cannot possibly enter. So the result is that ever since 1870, or a few years later, the papal authority is very much overestimated. I have on another occasion explained on how the papal authority has to be seen as a vicarial authority. The Pope is not the president of the Catholic Church, he's the vice president. And the papal powers are very clearly defined in his oath of incoronation, where it especially points out that he has to follow tradition. He is subject to tradition, not the master of tradition. This is also contained in the 4th chapter of the Dogmatic Constitution, which is actually the Constitutio Dogmatica Prima Pastor Aeternus de Ecclesia Christi of the 18th of July 1870, and in the 4th chapter, which carries the Denzinger Schönmetzer number 3070, you have the explicit definition that the Holy Spirit has been given to the successors of Peter not in order to have them reveal a new truth, but to saintly safeguard and interpret and faithfully interpret the handed-down tradition. Now, this is the whole point. The Pope is absolutely bound to tradition. He's not the master of tradition. Therefore, it is absolutely not sufficient to speak about an ecumenical council just because the Pope called it a council. The Pope called it, then led it, and then called it a council. And I will explain this. Ludwig Ott, who is one of my favorite authors in Catholic theology, still, he says that in order to speak about an ecumenical council, you have to have the Pope gathering the bishops. You have to have the Pope gathering the majority of bishops. And he has to approve whatever the council will later on publish as decisions and doctrine. As much as I respect Ludwig Ott, and I have to say that I've hardly ever found a mistake in his books, I have to say that he is thoroughly wrong on this definition of a council. If Ludwig Ott was right, that the very fact that the Pope calls a council makes it a council, then the first 8 ecumenical councils would not have been councils. I'll explain. I wrote up a list of these councils because, contrary to what some people seem to think about me, my memory is not photographic. The first council of Nicaea in 325 was called by the emperor. The Second Council of Constantinople in 381 was called by the emperor. The Pope was not even present, and the council only was approved as an ecumenical council in the 6th century. The Third Council of Ephesus of 431 was called by the emperor. The Pope was present. The Fourth Council of Chalcedon of 451 was called by the emperor. The Pope attended. The Fifth Council of Constantinople, 553, was called by the emperor, and the Pope didn't even show up. The Sixth Council of Constantinople, number 3, was called by the emperor, and the Pope attended. The Seventh Council of Nicaea, 787, was called by the emperor, and the Pope attended. The Eighth Council of Constantinople, number 4, was called by the emperor in 869, lasted until 870, and the Pope was present. So how would one be able to say that in order to have a council, all that's sufficient is that the Pope calls it, that the Pope proclaims a council? Obviously, we cannot justifiably think in such a formalistic way. Because, you see, the whole point about a council is, a council, very obviously, since the bishops will sit together and discuss things. So a council has something in common with a board meeting, a conference. At the same time, and I think that's a much more important side to any ecumenical council, when the council is opened, the bishops put on the cope, they put on the mitre, and they would carry the crozier if it wasn't for the presence of the Pope, and they will proceed into, last time it was St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. They would solemnly proceed into St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, dressed as if it was for Vespers or for the consecration of an abbot, which are sacramentals. And then they would kneel down, all of them, at the same time, and sing the Veni Creator Spiritus to invoke the Holy Spirit to guide the council. How can anyone say that this is just a board meeting? It's not like the Bavarian beer meeting on Sunday after Mass, where people sit down together and discuss the problems of the village. Well, the church in a way is a small village because Earth is small, the world is small. But to me it seems, and not just to me by the way, but to all Catholic dictionaries before 1950, that this would be, first of all, formalistic, second, insufficient, as a definition or even as a description of a council. If it was sufficient to sit down together to discuss things with majority vote, there would be no need to call on the Holy Spirit, there would be no need to put on the mitre, and there would be no need to put on the cope, which means there would be no need to dress liturgically. Bishops do not dress liturgically for having dinner. Bishops dress liturgically in order to perform a holy act, be it a sacrament, but since there are 7 sacraments, period, and not an 8th or 9th sacrament, you cannot possibly say that a council would be a sacrament. But they are also dressed liturgically in order to administer a sacramental. The sacramental is somewhat analogically similar to the sacrament, but it does not confer the grace out of itself, ex opere operato, out of the work that is done. And I would venture to say, in accordance to the couple of dozen of dictionaries that I was able to consult on this problem, that in case of doubt, a council is much closer to a sacramental, if not higher than the sacramentals, and it's much closer to a sacrament rather than to a board meeting, like when the board of directors meet, or the whatever you call them. The point is that with the solemn ritual invocation of the Holy Spirit and the according dress, a council has to be considered a holy liturgical act. We may, according to the old definition of sacramentals, we may dispute if it's a sacramental. Some people might say no, some others might agree. The whole point is, if it is anything, then it is higher than a sacramental and about the closest thing that can go to, up to the level of a sacrament. You must not forget that one of the most important purposes of the existence of the Church is to safeguard the truth. It's one of its foremost reasons to exist. If that is true, which is a dogma, then the very extraordinary, I will come back to that term, the very extraordinary occasion on which this is taking place cannot be considered a mere formal gathering. In most of the available Catholic dictionaries, including, if I remember well, the Catholic Encyclopedia, you will notice that a council is usually put on the same level as any decision, any possible decision of the highest authority in the Church, which is the magisterium, and in that case the infallible magisterium. So one of the characteristics of a council is that it has to be considered infallible if it decides something. Such a rare and special occasion, I have to point out again that one would need to have a twisted mind to think that an ecumenical council is something ordinary in church history. There was a council in 325, 381, 431, 451, 553, 680, 787, 869, 1123, 1139, 1179, 1215, 1245, 1274, 1311, 1414, 1431, 1512, 1545, and then in 1869. That makes 206 years because Trent ended in 1563. It makes 206 years between the last two councils. You cannot possibly say this is an ordinary, everyday happening in the Church, just like a sermon given by the Pope or an encyclical published by the Pope. Something of such rare, consider the Church is 2,000 years old and we're talking about 20 ecumenical councils, not 400. Such a rare and special occasion, to call that a board meeting means to trivialize one of the most important historical events in church history, an ecumenical council. Therefore, I think it is absolutely justified. I cannot pronounce this as a dogma as I lack papal authority, but I think it's absolutely justified to say that in case of doubt, you have to consider an ecumenical council under similar terms as a sacrament or a sacramental. In both cases, whenever you talk about the validity of a sacrament, you have to talk about matter, form, and intention. I explain. At Holy Mass, the matter is bread and wine. The form is the words of consecration, hic est enim carix sanguinis mei, novit aeterni testamenti, and so on. And the intention has to be in all 7 sacraments to do not what the Church wants to do, not to do what the Church has done, not to do what the Church might do, but to do what the Church does. What is it what the Church does? Well, whatever the Church has always done and always will do and intends to do. This is what the Church does. Simplified. If you don't have the intention of doing what the Church does, the sacrament will, as long as it's indifferent, still be valid. But if anyone who has a publicly different intention, be it that he simply doesn't want to do it, or he wants to do something different, in that case the sacrament will not be valid. If we want to know if Vatican II was a council, we therefore, since, as we can see from history, the mere fact that the Pope called it together, that the Pope called it a council, and that the Pope blessed it afterwards,